I could see from the jet bridge, I could see the World Trade, it was burning. I saw something hit it. As I'm walking through the airport, I'm watching the flight attendants running through the airport screaming, "It's us, it's us." I had no idea it was American that had hit the towers. "You know that LA flight?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We were never going anywhere." He says, this was a sting operation by the FBI. They took a few guys connected with the hijacking off the LA flight at the next gate. I was on flight 1 from JFK to LA that morning. The FBI told me that we were supposed to hit the Sears Tower in Chicago that morning. Once the service was over, one of the marshals walked up front to first class, and I followed him up there, and I said, "Okay, what's going on?" He said, "Well," he goes, "if you want the truth," he said, "they're part of a terrorist cell that we're watching." And this was 6 years later. Okay. There's so much that people don't know. Okay.
Hey, this is Matt Cox, and I'm going to be doing an interview with Carol Hellerman. She has a contradictory story to the national or the historic narrative of 9/11. She's got a lot of interesting and contradictory situations or events that occurred, and we're going to talk to her about it. And it's going to be a super interesting interview. And so I appreciate you guys watching. Check it out. Let's start real quick, like with, where you were raised, how you became a flight, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So where were you raised?
Okay. I was raised on Long Island. I'm a true New Yorker.
Okay.
I grew up and didn't realize the job that I had wanted since I was 12 years old until I was 40. I didn't become a flight attendant until I was 40. I basically raised my daughter and then became a flight attendant. And a year and a half into my new job, 9/11 happened.
Oh, wow.
So I was on a flight at Kennedy Airport. We were scheduled at 9 o'clock to leave to go from JFK to LA. And obviously about quarter till 9, the plane hit the World Trade. I was directing at the front door of the airplane, and which means, I was showing, it was a big plane, so I was showing which side of the plane for the people to go on. And the agent came down and she pulled me off the plane and said, "Look at this." And she pulled me off, and I could see from the jet bridge, I could see the World Trade, it was burning. I saw something hit it from the jet bridge.
When you say the agent, you mean the agent with the airline?
Agent, yeah, with American Airlines, yeah, the gate agent. So I was like, "Oh, wow," and my first thought was everybody else's thought. "Oh, some poor guy had a heart attack in a small plane." And, you don't really think that at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, I actually remember thinking, like, wow, like how could that have happened? Like those buildings are so, like, I was like I remember thinking something's definitely wrong. Like you wouldn't accidentally hit that. Like, you're right. Like maybe there was
Like,
a pilot,
yeah,
something went wrong. That's not an accident.
right. We thought it was an accident that maybe he had a heart attack and,
Right. Exactly. Like there was definitely not like, oh, you clipped the building. It was like, no, there's no way to miss those buildings. Something definitely, like you said, somebody became incapacitated or something.
something, yeah. So I go back on the plane. I run to the back to tell the other flight attendants in the back of the plane, that the plane hit the building, whatever. Then I go back up front and I hear the captain make an announcement. Captain says, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an air disaster, our flight's been canceled. First thing I want you to do is say a prayer. Second thing I want you to do is pick up your luggage and leave quietly." I was like, wow, they canceled us. Okay. So meanwhile, I'm not thinking anything's going on. I'm just, so all of a sudden, 3 or 4 Middle Eastern men came up to the front of the airplane with everybody else who was deplaning. and started arguing with my purser. The purser is a lead flight attendant who handles like any problems on the flight. And they were saying, you can't cancel this. And they were like basically getting really angry with her. Meanwhile, we don't think anything because nothing like that's ever happened. I mean, you're not thinking anything about it. They were just angry they couldn't go, So they get off the plane. Everybody deplanes. And believe it or not, I was probably the last person in America to know that what was going on. Because what we did is we stayed on the airplane, the flight attendants, and said, well, sometimes if things cancel, scheduling, with American will put you on something else, or, so we were wondering what was going to happen with us that day. So all of a sudden, the gate agent runs back on the plane, and she says, another plane hit the World Trade and one hit the Pentagon. She goes, you need to get off the plane. They locked down Kennedy Airport, and you need to go to operations. All airports that have a hub have an operations for flight attendants, which is a room, where we can stay and, hang out, TV and whatever,
Right.
a little lounge for the flight attendants. So we all went up to operations, and basically, the plane, we watched the planes fall on the TV, and you could have heard a pin drop, and it was just,
Right.
it was talking. Then they said, okay, it's, they're throwing everybody out of Kennedy. They're evacuating Kennedy. You all have to leave. So we were thrown out. There was a lot going on. When I walked to operations, I had no idea what was going on when they, locked down Kennedy. As I'm walking through the airport, I'm watching the flight attendants running through the airport screaming, it's us, it's us. I had no idea it was American that had hit the towers. So as a New Yorker, as a brand new flight attendant, and they hit my company, they hit my city, I was just so angry. I did not get scared. I was just mad. Right. So then when I went home, like the next day, I called our schedulers and said, I will fly for you. You put me on the next flight going anywhere. I want to help out. So the next day, they got me a trip to San Francisco. And I said, okay, well, what position? Because every flight attendant has a position that gives you responsibilities of what you do on the airplane. So they said, what position do you want? And at a year and a half, you don't get stuff like that. You just get what's left over because it all goes by seniority. So I get to the plane. Well, actually, I get to Kennedy. I go into operations to sign in so they know I'm there for my trip. I sign in and I find out that there were 3 flights that are going out that night. San Francisco, Miami, and LA. And if you think about it now, like later on I thought about it, those were all places to escape from the U.S. that weren't the East Coast where the terrorists were all concentrated, if you understand what I'm saying. So as I'm walking to my flight, there's a LA flight over to the right of me, that gate, to the left of me. As I'm walking by, I see all kinds of commotion going on. There was like Port Authority cops, there was like everything going on, but I just continued to walk to my flight.
Rossini, in the 1990s, was a 20-something-year-old Los Angeles-based drug trafficker of ecstasy and ice. He and his associates drove luxury European supercars, lived in Beverly Hills penthouses, and dated Playboy models while dodging federal indictments. Then, 2 FBI officers with the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force entered the picture. Dirty agents willing to fix cases and identify informants. Suddenly, 2 of Rossini's associates, confidential informants working with federal law enforcement, were murdered. Everyone pointed to Rossini. As his co-defendants prepared for trial, U.S. Attorney Robert Mueller sat down to debrief Rossini at Leavenworth Penitentiary, and another story emerged. A tale of FBI corruption and complicity in murder. You see, Pierre Rossini knew something that no one else knew. The truth. And Robert Mueller and the federal government have been covering it up to this very day. Devil Exposed. A twisted tale of drug trafficking, corruption, and murder in the City of Angels. Available on Amazon and Audible.
So I get to my flight and, we're on the plane and the plane was packed. Everybody was trying to get out of New York. The only flight attendant that was there that had more years with the company than me was a San Francisco woman who wanted to try and go home. The rest were all brand new flight attendants, and they were crying. And I said to them, "Why are you here?" And they said, "Well, we're brand new and, we're on probation. They told us if we didn't do the flight that, they would fire us," which is lovely. So I basically, at a year and a half, had to take like half of them under my wing and show them what to do on the plane. Anyway, so all of a sudden, we're delayed a little while. The captain comes on and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to air traffic, our plane has been, it's been delayed. The flight's been delayed." So I look at the other flight attendant and I say, "Nobody's up there. What is he talking about? Air traffic." So all of a sudden, people are on their phones, all the passengers, and they're like, "We heard that they found people with box cutters and knives on the LA flight next to, at the other gate," and blah, blah, blah. And I basically took control and said, "Look, until the captain tells us what's going on, everything's okay. Just, hang out." So after about another half an hour, the captain comes back on and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, our flight's been canceled." So I'm like, okay, great. So they deplane it.
Why? What do you know? Why it was canceled? Because of the.
I'll tell you why it was canceled.
Okay, all right.
So we waited behind, like the flight attendants who were working the flight, and there were other flight attendants on the plane who wanted to go home to San Francisco, so they were just riding like with the passengers. So we all stayed behind. We're talking. Passengers are long gone through the terminal by the time we leave. We get off the plane, we come out, we start to walk down the terminal, and somebody, I don't know who it was, yells, "Turn around and run." So we start running down the end of the terminal. I'm standing next to the captain. I said, "What the hell's going on now?" He goes, "You know that LA flight?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We were never going anywhere." He says, this was a sting operation by the FBI. They took a few guys connected with the hijacking off the LA flight at the next gate. They told the pilots. They didn't tell the flight attendants. I had no idea. Okay. So we waited down there until somebody told us that we could walk by. As I was walking, I saw a manager that I know, American manager, take the flight attendants from the LA flight into a little room. It's a debrief room. And he took them in there. And if you could have seen their faces, they looked like somebody shot them. I mean, they looked shook up, just awful. So I continued to walk down to get to my car to go home. And as I looked at the gate where the LA flight was, there was a FBI SWAT team guy standing at the door with a rifle.
Right.
Okay. So my thing is, I don't know how they got away with that without it coming out. Nobody, it was never reported. Although, however, my mother was watching TV and she called me that night and, I told her we didn't leave. I called her on the way, back to my home, and she said, "I was wondering," she goes, "I was watching TV and the news cut in and said, just in from Kennedy Airport." She goes, "And then they cut to commercial and they never came back to it on the TV." So I'm like, that's interesting. So basically, that happened. So then I go and decide to volunteer again to do another flight. Actually, I have to say something. Why I thought with the bridges and the tunnels, and New York was locked down.
I was going to say, yeah.
Why I thought I was going anywhere on an airplane like the day after 9/11 is beyond me. I just didn't think about it, I guess.
Yeah, when you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, everything was closed for like a week.
4 days.
4 days?
Because on the fourth day, I got a flight. I rode, they call it deadheading. I rode on a plane. I deadheaded to San Diego and brought the first transcon back from San Diego to New York. This is where I get my information. I'm on the plane, we're working the flight, and captain, there's a employee captain riding on the plane to New York. He's not working it. So the captain comes to the back and he starts talking to us. And he says, he goes, I was on flight 1 from JFK to LA that morning. The FBI told me that we were supposed to hit the Sears Tower in Chicago that morning. And then he asked me if I had any information, and I told him, why didn't you talk to the flight attendants? What are you asking me for? They were out there with the people, So I said, really, you're on flight 1? I said, so was I. And he told me that the FBI told him that there was a target for every building in the U.S. This is what he told me, okay? Like I said, this is what the captain told me. I had no idea that I was supposed to hit the Sears Tower that morning on my flight. But putting together why these Middle Eastern men were arguing with my purser kind of, he kind of put the pieces together after a while, and, basically that tied it all in together. So.
So the TMZ documentary, goes over some of this.
Right.
Like, is that when you decided like you were gonna go ahead and no?
Actually, I had talked to Jesse, who is my publicist. I talked to him way before the TMZ thing came out. And I have post-traumatic stress, so I really didn't want to do this.
Right.
Basically said to me, you really need to do this after that came out. Because I basically told him, I don't think I can do this. Then after the 5th plane came out, he said, you really need to do this. Look, other people are finally coming forward with this information. So no, it wasn't based on that, because I had told him that right before the TMZ came out. So yeah, but there were other flight attendants that I know that told me that there were that morning out of JFK, they were flying London, and they said that there were suspicious people on their flight too, that they thought they were going to be hijacked also when they thought about it later on. That it was all over. There's a site on Facebook that only flight attendants are privileged to. Nobody else can get on that site. And after the TMZ thing, a few of them were talking about how they landed when they grounded all the airplanes. A few of them were talking about how they landed in Kansas City, and the FBI came on their plane and took guys off of their plane in Kansas City when they grounded it. They weren't going to Kansas City. I think they were going to LA or something, or San Francisco or someplace. But when they grounded all the planes, they landed it in Kansas City.
And the FBI showed up and pulled several
people off.
Of these Middle Eastern men?
Yes. Yep. And also, what was the other one? There was another one. I was at London. But this was happening. What I'm saying is people are, saying, hey, after they saw the TMZ thing, this happened on my plane, so. Yeah.
So you believe it's more than, so you're saying it's more than just one, a 5th plane. There were multiple other planes.
Oh, definitely.
So why do you think the FBI or the government in general would not let that be known?
Well, first of all, I think it would scare the American public so
Right.
badly that nobody would get on a plane for a very long time, and that would kill the economy, which is what the terrorists were aiming for.
Right. Which really devastated the airline industry in general with just the 4 planes.
Right, exactly.
If they thought this was a concentrated effort that could be duplicated, then it may have been even more catastrophic.
Right. And if you think about it logically, after 9/11, they sealed off New York and a few other places, right? It was locked down. Nobody could get in or out, right? Why? Because there were other terrorists in the area. There were other planes. There were other people in the area they needed to catch. So, yeah, it makes sense, you know. But, yeah, also, one of the reasons I also want to talk about it is because the flight attendants don't get enough credit for 9/11. It really galls me that one of the main reasons that they grounded those planes so there were no other incidents is because 2 of the flight attendants on Flight 11 that went into the World Trade called base operations from the airport. They called their operations center and reported exactly what was going on that plane. So
Prior to taking off?
prior to hitting the building,
Oh, okay.
yeah, they were in the air. And they called base operations and told them what was going on the airplane. I know what it was, and it was not pretty, let's put it that way. They basically described everything that was happening. One of the flight attendants was still on the phone with operations when the plane hit the building.
Right. Yeah, I read the 9/11 report.
Yeah.
Probably 5 or 6 years ago.
So if it hadn't been for those flight attendants, and I believe it was one, it was an air traffic control guy who basically said they told me how to wait or something for some kind of authorization to start landing all the planes, and he said no, and he did it. But, between him and the 2 flight attendants, that's the reason why that, it saved a lot of grief in this country.
So after all of this, were flight attendants given additional training on or anything along those lines?
Okay, what happens with a flight attendant is once a year, hopefully you don't use what you're trained for. Flight attendants are not trained to serve your drink. They're trained for terrorism, medical, evacuation procedures. I could evacuate 7 different aircraft in about 3 to 5 minutes. Okay? This is our training. So the FAA mandates once a year that flight attendants go back to training. So every year I had to requal every year. I redo my qualifications. So yeah, so that was added, that particular type of terrorism, because in my initial training or every year, we do review other types of terroristic activity on the plane and what to look for. So yeah, they did train us in that, in what to look for. Yeah.
Okay. And what are you supposed to do? Do you notify a marshal, an air marshal?
Well, if they're on the flight, you would, yeah. But
do you even know if they're on the flight?
yes, flight attendants do know that they're on the flight. Yes, but they are not to be. If there's like somebody who's like something stupid, like who's upset about a drink or whatever,
right?
You're supposed to even go near them. You don't. They're only there for something that's life threatening for the entire plane.
Right.
So yeah. But yeah. So basically, that was my story. It was happening later on also, like maybe 6 years later. I was involved in another incident.
What was that?
I was sitting standby, which is every flight attendant up to a certain amount of years has to do a month of reserve, which means you're at the beck and call of the company with like 15 days off for the whole month. But other than that, 24 hours a day, they can call you and say, come to the airport. My duty that day was standby, which is to sit at the airport in case a flight attendant doesn't make it in and fill in on the flight so that the flight can go. So I was sitting standby, and they about our operations. And they said, Flight Attendant Hellerman, we have a flight for you. I said, okay, where am I going? They said, you're going, I think it was San Francisco. I can't remember the destination, or maybe it was LA. And I said, okay. And I said, what's the flight number? Because after 9/11, my husband wanted another flight number of every flight I was on. So they said, just go down there now. Go down to gate, blah, 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 whatever it was, 12, whatever. Just go. You have to go now. I'm like, okay. So I go down. I go to the gate. There's nobody there. So I got on the computer at the gate, and I pull up my flight. It was at a different gate. So I walk over to the other gate. Gate agent says to me, are you the standby? I said, yeah. She goes, get on the plane. I said, okay. So I get on the plane. I walk on. And I thought there was nobody in the waiting area. So I thought, oh, my God, they're all waiting for me to get on the plane so that they can leave, right?
Right.
I get on the plane, and there's cleaners on the airplane replacing blankets and all kinds of things. And I'm like, I get off the airplane, I go back up to the gate agent, and I go, there's nobody on that plane. She goes, yes, sir, the flight attendants are in the back. Just get on the plane. I'm like, okay. And they never spoke to me like that. I was just like, whoa, what the heck's going on? So I go to the back of the plane, and the flight attendants are in the back of the plane hanging out, waiting for the cleaners, I guess, to finish. And I said, they looked at me and they go, oh, how'd they get you? And I said, what? And they said, yeah, how'd they get you? You don't know, do you? And I said, no, what? Well, the flight was supposed to go out earlier. The flight attendants saw specific, saw behavior from a few of their passengers that was not right. They were Middle Eastern. They were reading the Quran. They wouldn't take anything from them. They smell like, what was it, roses. There's all kinds of telltale signs.
Right.
Before they do one of these things. Okay.
Right.
So the flight attendants refused to take the plane. They walked off. They told them, we're not taking that plane. So all day, we talked to each other,
Right.
Very vocal. So we're like telling each other, apparently I never got the message from anybody not to get on that plane because they still intended to take the plane. What they did is they deplaned everybody. They checked all their luggage. They went through everything again, and they had no reason because they could be sued. I mean, obviously you can't discriminate, so they had to take the flight. So, they were waiting for flight attendants and they couldn't get enough. We actually went out 2 flight attendants short for service. There are 2 levels. One is staffing levels for service. The other is staffing levels for each door in case there's an emergency and you have to evacuate. So we went out with 2 flight attendants short for staffing levels because nobody would take the flight. They boarded the flight. And believe it or not, Pat Benatar was on my flight. I worked business class. Her and her husband are dull. But, so she was in my business class working it. But there was one gentleman in my business class, a Middle Eastern gentleman, and he was reading the Quran. And me being, even with my post-traumatic stress, me being the person I am, I wasn't going to let him terrify me. And I walked over and I smiled at him and I said, can I get you something to drink? And he looked at me and went, no. And he continued to read the Quran. That's the first time. They don't want anything from you.
Right.
Once we got in let me tell you why the only reason I took the flight was because there were air marshals on my flight.
Right.
That's the only reason I took the flight. He went in the bathroom. After he came out, I went in the bathroom. I ripped the entire bathroom apart to make sure he didn't put anything in there. I mean, it's, which I want to get out. Our training is much more extensive than what people think it is.
Right.
Once the service was over, one of the marshals walked up front to first class, and I followed him up there, and I said, okay, what's going on? He said, well, he goes, if you want the truth, he said they're part of a terrorist cell that we're watching. And this was 6 years later. Okay. There's so much that people don't know. Okay. It's amazing. So anyway, that was...
Yeah, that could have just been a test run to see what would happen if they let them on the plane, if they...
Exactly.
Like, let's go through the whole process, but if they do search us, we'll have nothing on us. There's no reason. They'll let us get on the plane. Maybe it kind of throws them off, you know.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, that's just food for thought. That was something else. I also am the unlucky person to happen to be 4 years after 9/11. I believe it was 4 years. I was in London, 2 blocks from where they blew up the buses and the tubes. As my husband likes to say, you're always there, and thank God nothing ever happens to you. It's like that morning was a horror too, because, you know, they wouldn't let any buses drive after that. They locked down London for all buses. And when they picked me up to come home that afternoon, the bus driver had to park, normally pulls in front of the hotel. They wouldn't let him park in front of the hotel, but I had to get on that bus.
Right.
Yeah. So, and the poor little man, his name was Clive. I remember he used to drive our bus. I did London for 16 years. London was my route after, you know, a few years after 9/11. And, well, Clive, you know, I came out and I said, how are you? And he just shook his head. And I said, yeah, I'm sorry. I know. But he had to get in that bus and drive us, not knowing, you know, I mean, it was pretty bad. And that morning, that afternoon, I had Tina Louise on my flight. Do you know who she is?
No.
Gilligan's Island, Ginger.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And she was awful. And she had to sit in coach because the flight was full. Everybody was trying to get out of London. And she was not happy about it, you know. And her daughter kept going, do you know who my mother is? Do you know my mother? Because she wanted first-class chicken, a whole bottle of water for herself, the big ones. You know, and I wanted to say, yeah, she's some has-been.
I was gonna say, I know who she was.
But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That was
it's funny. I was gonna say that most people I know with celebrities, like either they're super nice or they're just horrible people. Like, you know, so
America was and still is, because I guess Prince what's his name? Just one of the princes just flew American from LA to the coronation. Prince Andrew. He flew, you know, American to London. We were, and I guess still are, the airline of the stars, because over the years when I worked LA a lot, we had a lot of stars on the flight. So yeah.
Bailout is a psychological true crime thriller that pits a narcissistic conman against an egotistical pathological liar. Marcus Schrinker, the money manager who attempted to fake his own death during the 2008 financial crisis, is about to be released from prison, and he's ready to talk. He's ready to tell you the story no one's heard. Schrinker sits down with true crime writer Matthew B. Cox, a fellow inmate serving time for bank fraud. Schrinker lays out the details: the disgruntled clients who persecuted him for unanticipated market losses, the affair that ruined his marriage, and the treachery of his scorned wife, the woman who framed him for securities fraud, leaving him no choice but to make a bogus distress call and plunge from his multi-million-dollar private aircraft in the dead of night. The $11.1 million in life insurance, the missing $1.5 million in gold. The fact is, Schrinker wants you to think he's innocent. The problem is, Cox knows Schrinker's a pathological liar, and his story's a fabrication. As Cox subtly coaxes, cajoles, and yes, cons Schrinker into revealing his deceptions, his stranger-than-fiction life of lies slowly unravels. This is the story Schrinker didn't want you to know. Bailout: The Life and Lies of Marcus Schrinker. Available now on Barnes & Noble, Etsy, and Audible.
Well, you know, I go with God. What is the really horrible one? I always end up being booked on. What is it?
Oh, Spirit.
Spirit. It's the worst. It's like I have a buddy who says it's the Greyhound bus of the sky.
Yeah, that's what we call it. The flight attendants call it that.
Oh, it's the worst. You know, like, but to me, you know, I typically, like, first of all, I'm short, so coach is not a big deal. Secondly, I typically always I download like a movie on my phone or something. So I'll play a movie, put my headphones in, and just,
The reason I worked for I used to work for United Airlines. I worked for United Reservations years ago before I became a flight attendant. And the reason I worked for the big airlines, or I interviewed for only the big airlines like Delta, American, and United, is because of the pilots. Because if I was going to have my life on a plane as many times a month, I wanted to make sure that I had the best pilots, and those airlines basically hired military pilots. So those guys really know what they're doing in an emergency. So that's basically why I only would fly for American, Delta, or United.
Yeah, I have my sister worked at Delta.
Oh,
I don't know how long, 5 years. This was 30, 40 years ago, probably for 5 or 6 years. And then I have a buddy who flies for Spirit.
Oh, okay.
And he does not have military experience. He's like,
young, right?
Oh, he's young. And I remember he said he learned how to fly. I learned how to fly for a while. He said, I got my license. And you have to get licensed on different types of planes. So you different certificates. He said, I got those. And then I met a guy. He was like, you should try and fly for one of the big airlines. And I thought, no, that's not. He's like, yeah, you can. He's like, really? And he said, so I applied and I got it. Like, you serious?
You have to have a certain amount of hours, though. No,
he does, and I think he flew private. He said you take simulations, and then you have to, it's a training. There's a training course, but like they didn't just say here's 400, here's 300 people, do your best. But
I have flight attendant friends who, two of them, male and female, who both became pilots. And they both started, or my one friend now, he's starting at a regional. You start with the smaller planes at a regional, like Eagle. He started flying for Eagle, So you take it slowly.
He's he is pretty young. Like, he's probably in his early 30s when he started. So it was like...
as a flight attendant, I get flight privileges. I can also, have flight privilege on other airlines. So I remember going on JetBlue because at the time American had merged with Useless Air, as I like to call them, and we didn't have a lot of Phoenix flights, and I had a friend in Phoenix, so I would take JetBlue when they first started because they did a lot of Phoenix runs from JFK, which was great. So I could go on them just standby as a standby passenger, for basically $40 or something ridiculous.
Right.
But their thing was, if you were flight crew and you went on their planes, you had to introduce yourself to the pilots. This was their thing. So I'm like, okay. So I get on the plane and I have to go in the cockpit and stick my head in and go, hi guys, I'm with American, whatever. So when I stuck my head in there, in the flight deck, I looked in and I went, oh my God, he's 12 years old.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God.
I was going to say, he's in his early 30s and he's been flying for 5, 6, 7 years. So he must have started in his late 20s.
Well, it's expensive. Flight school is expensive.
Yeah.
Now they have to pay for that. That's, get your hours is very expensive. And they don't start them off at they get, progressively, they get a really good salary, but they don't start them off that way, so to pay for all those flight hours, that's why they hired like military pilots, which, the government gave them their flight hours. I mean, they flew for the military.
Right.
Air Force, Navy, and we could always tell the guys who were Navy pilots because when they came in like nobody was in the back of the plane.
Right.
And I would say to them, we're back there, right? You fly for the Navy, and the guy would look at me and go, the pilot would look at me and go, how do you know that? And I go, because of the way you came in, like you were coming on an aircraft carrier, on a Navy ship or something. It's true. You could tell. But anyway.
Well, all right. Do you have anything else you want to cover?
Well, about that particular topic, no. About how the employees at the airlines are treated, yes. I'd like to talk about if you've heard anything about how they were poisoning their crew members with uniforms. Have you heard about the poison uniforms? Alaska
No.
are actually sued. Okay, the flight attendants at Alaska Air actually sued because they broke out in rashes, have respiratory ailments, lost their hair because of the amount of chemicals in their uniform. And when you're in a little metal tube and you're locked up in there and you sweat in one of those uniforms, it goes into your skin. I actually have health issues because of the uniforms that my company had us wear for a very short time. There were flight attendants I know who had never been back to work because they were so sick from the uniforms. They got Hashimoto's disease. They got all kinds of stuff. My issue was my airline knew that the flight attendants at Alaska were suing because of the chemicals and what it did to them. And they bought from the same company. They must have got a really good deal. And they bought the uniforms from the same company.
Well,
How American got out of it was basically they told us, if you have a problem with the uniform, just wear your old uniform. So we looked ridiculous because half of us were in our old uniforms and part of us were in the new uniforms. So it was kind of ridiculous.
well, I mean, what are they treating the uniforms with something?
Well, it came from China, and all your clothes from China are treated with chemicals that are way above what the European Union would allow in their country. America doesn't have any standards when it comes to our clothes. We're allowed to be poisoned in our clothes.
So what do they treat?
Issue.
Are they treating it for like with pesticide so they don't get?
They don't get bugs, formaldehyde, all kinds, cadmium. This is all in your clothing. The wrinkle-free thing. Yeah, well, that's chemicals that are living through. It's getting into your clothes and chemicals through your skin. Yeah. So that's another issue I had. That actually there was a lawsuit which I'm involved in, but I have the lawyer's name still here on my phone as an email, but I never heard word one about what happened with it.
How long ago was it? How long ago was?
Oh, this has got to be, let's see, I'm retired 2.5 years. It's got to be almost 8 years ago,
Oh wow.
yeah, it's crazy. Well, it took a long time, also I heard UPS, it's called Twin Hill is the name of the company. And I heard UPS also had their uniforms from Twin Hill, and they had the same problem. Rashes, all respiratory ailments, pink eye. I mean, you name it, we got it from this particular uniform. It was disgusting. I wore, obviously I went back to wearing my old uniform. I'm glad I didn't throw it out when I got the new one, but just being around it still,
And you don't know what happened with the lawsuit?
Nope. I have no idea what happened. I know what happened. We'll see. It got thrown out. Alaska Air's flight attendants, their lawsuit got thrown out. It didn't fly. I don't know if this is, and big on conspiracy theories, but I don't know if this is, a government related thing or I don't know corporations. I don't know. I don't understand how women losing their hair. This one girl's almost bald. Okay. I mean, there's all the same things, the rashes, the respiratory problems. I don't understand how they got away with it. I just don't. But, it's another thing on the list of.
Well, it's difficult to, sue internationally. And even if you get a lawsuit against a Chinese corporation, the likelihood that they're actually going to pay.
Well, Twin Hill, I think, is an American company that buys from China. They're not, what I'm saying? So that's a manufacturer. They got to know what's in their product.
Right.
So there you go. But it didn't work. So I don't know. Like I said, a lot of people I know their health was affected terribly from it. So I don't know. Anyway.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
Hey, I appreciate you guys watching, and do me a favor, if you like the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you get notified of videos like this. Leave me a comment in the comment section, and I really appreciate it. So share the video. Thank you.